I buried my husband on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, my son told me I no longer belonged in the house. He didn't say it cruelly. That's the worst part. He said it with a kind of strained politeness, like he was doing me a favor by giving it to me straight. "Mom," he said, standing in the kitchen doorway with a mug of coffee I had brewed, "you'll be more comfortable somewhere quieter. This place has too many stairs now. It's just not your home anymore." Not your home anymore. I stood by the sink, dish towel in hand, my fingers still damp from washing the mugs that hadn't even cooled from the funeral guests. My husband's coat was still hanging by the door. His boots were still by the mat, as if he might walk back in and scold the mud from them. I didn't argue, didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded once, slowly. He left the room like he had settled something, the way men do when they think decision means closure. But here's what he didn't know. My name was on that mortgage. My husband and I had refinanced 3 years ago when the roof needed replacing. My signature was there, just as valid as his. We'd paid it together, laughed through the paperwork, fought over the colour of shingles. That house wasn't just walls. It was 38 years of love, debt, arguments, burnt dinners, repaired plumbing, winter mornings by the fireplace. It was mine as much as his, and I wasn't done with it. That night, I packed a small bag, nothing dramatic, a few clothes, my checkbook, the manila folder with our loan documents. I didn't slam a door. I didn't make a speech. I simply left before dawn, while they were sleeping. By 6 a.m., the automated mortgage system flagged a change. The joint account had been withdrawn from. By 6:12, my son had checked the online balance. By 6:43, he called once, then again, and again. By 7, the count was 99. I didn't answer. I sat on a motel bed, the kind with stiff sheets and a humming fridge, sipping tea from a styrofoam cup. The window showed me a strip of Alaskan sky, grey, open, endless. I felt small, yes, but not powerless. Because this time I wasn't just leaving. I was taking the house with me. He thought the mortgage was just a formality, something handled by the bank and forgotten once the keys were handed over. But I had stayed up through every statement, penciled notes on every interest increase, and walked to the post office each month to mail the payment while he was still finding his feet in college. My husband never let me feel like a passenger in that house. We built it together, paycheck by paycheck, storm by storm. And yet, after the funeral, my son moved through the house like it already belonged to him. He walked into the den with measuring tape, said something about turning it into an office, cleared his throat when I left my knitting on the arm of the couch, labelled boxes in the garage without asking what was inside them. When I told him the green trunk under the stairs had his father's army letters, he smiled and said, "Oh, I thought it was junk." Junk. Letters his father wrote from overseas while I waited with an infant on my hip and frost creeping down the windows. The morning I left, no one noticed. No creak of floorboards behind me, no voice calling out. Just the sound of my own shoes, soft against the linoleum, drove the truck slowly down the gravel road, watching the porch disappear in the rearview mirror. I didn't cry. Not then. There's a point where the tears dry up and something colder settles in. It doesn't burn. It holds you steady. At the motel, I unfolded the papers like relics. Our loan, our deed, the refinancing forms with both our names. He must have forgotten. Or maybe he never looked closely. I had stayed quiet during all the planning, all the funeral arrangements, the guest lists, the food trays. I had let them decide. Let them believe I was small and manageable. That was my mistake. I had taught them too well how to ignore me. By mid-morning, I was in a small bank branch with laminate floors and the scent of copier ink in the air. The woman behind the desk, Hannah, looked younger than my oldest grandchild, but her eyes sharpened when I showed her the documents. "Are you looking to close the account?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm looking to transfer my half." She raised an eyebrow, professional, but curious. I slid the stack across the desk and tapped the line with my name. Joint account, joint mortgage. My signature means something. We sat in silence while she clicked through her system. I sipped the bank's bad coffee and watched her face move through confusion, realization, and finally, respect. "I can initiate the freeze on co-authorization," she said carefully, "if that's what you want." "It is." She didn't ask why, just nodded and started typing. By lunchtime, the payment system was paused. The automatic draft was cancelled. Any future changes would now require both signatures. My son would learn that before dinner. I checked into a small rental across town. One of those cabins meant for weekend tourists, but empty this time of year. It smelled like cedar and mothballs. The bed was too firm, and the heater rattled, but it was mine. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I sat still without feeling like a shadow. I boiled water for tea and opened the window a crack. The Alaskan air bit at my cheeks, clean and unapologetic. That evening, the texts started. "Mum, what did you do to the bank? Are you okay? Why would you freeze the mortgage account? What's going on?" Then finally, "You can't just walk out and take the house with you." But that's exactly what I had done, not in body, but in name, in law, in rights they forgot I still held. At 9:30 p.m., he called again. This time he left a voicemail. "Mum, we've got bills due. I was trying to help you. We thought maybe a retirement home would be easier. You know, less space, fewer stairs. Why didn't you say anything?" I listened to that message twice. Then I deleted it. Because I had said things, just not in words they were willing to hear. I said it when I packed his father's boots away, carefully, not for throwing out, but for keeping. I said it when I stood at the sink alone, washing coffee mugs while they laughed in the next room. I said it every time I moved aside, made room, made less noise, made fewer demands. Now I was speaking differently, through silence, through bank signatures, through memory and legal paper. This time, they would have to listen. The next morning, I brewed my tea in silence, just the way I liked it. Strong, with a touch of honey. The rented cabin creaked in familiar rhythms, like an old friend settling beside me. There were no footsteps overhead, no passive-aggressive sighs when I used the wrong mug, no voices critiquing how long the kettle had been left to boil. Just me and peace. Outside, the snow had softened the world. Everything looked untouched, even the gravel drive. I watched a raven hop along the porch rail, bold and curious, and thought of my husband. He used to call them neighbours in feathers, and always left crusts for them on the ledge. We never had much, but we always shared. That's what made it so hard. How quickly my son forgot. By noon, I had a call from the mortgage company. A man named Clark, polite, confused. "Mrs. Talbot, we received notice of a freeze on your joint account. Your co-applicant attempted to make changes this morning. Something about transferring primary authority. We couldn't proceed without your consent. He insisted it was just a misunderstanding." Of course he did. "Do I need to come in?" I asked. "No, ma'am. We've made a note on the file. Nothing changes without your signature." "Good," I said. "Leave it that way." He hesitated. "Is everything okay?" I almost laughed at the question. What does okay mean when your child treats you like furniture with feelings? When they try to erase your name while the flowers from your husband's grave are still fresh? "I'm managing," I said. That night, the messages took on a new tone. Not panic, resentment. Do you really think this is fair? We were just trying to help. You've put us in a really difficult spot here. The word we again, as if I had never been part of that equation. I didn't respond. Instead, I wrote a letter. Not to them, to Walter. He was my husband's oldest friend. They hunted moose together in the 70s, before life became bills and doctors and grown children with opinions. Walter had been at our wedding, our 40th anniversary, and our kitchen table after every diagnosis. And more importantly, he had been the notary when we signed the mortgage. Walter, I wrote, I need to talk. I don't want sympathy. I want clarity. You once told me that owning something on paper means little if you forget to hold it in your hands. I think I'm ready to hold it again. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks through slush and wind to the small post office with the crooked flagpole. I mailed the letter, no tracking, no return receipt. I didn't need proof. Walter would come. By the time I returned to the cabin, there was a box on the porch. No note, just the box. Inside were the things they hadn't asked about. My wedding album. The crocheted shawl I'd made in the hospital waiting room. A half-empty bottle of my favourite lotion. And Paul's fishing hat, the one he wore every spring when he said, "Let's go sit by the river, even if the fish don't bite." They didn't know I'd notice what was missing. The deeds, the loan documents, the insurance folder. Those had been taken. They thought they were cleaning up, clearing clutter. But what they'd really done was expose how little they understood of what mattered. I sat on the floor beside the box and ran my fingers over the cracked brim of Paul's hat. I didn't cry. I'd done that already. I simply whispered aloud, "They don't know who I am." And maybe that was my fault. Maybe I had let myself become too quiet, too accommodating, too eager to be welcomed where I was once needed. But that was over now. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. I folded the shawl, carefully, like it still held the weight of waiting, and placed it on the bed. I opened the album. Paul's eyes looked back at me from a photo where we were both too young and too hopeful to imagine a day like this. And I promised him, right there, that I would not let our life be boxed up like seasonal decorations. That evening, I began writing again. Not letters, not lists, but my name. Over and over. In firm strokes, I practiced the signature that would finalize what I had already begun. Because this wasn't revenge. This was remembering. Walter arrived on the 3rd morning, just as the frost was beginning to melt from the eaves. He didn't knock right away. I watched from the window as he stood on the porch, rubbing his gloved hands together, looking at the trees like he was trying to remember their names. When he finally stepped forward and knocked, it wasn't the brisk knock of a man on business. It was gentler, like he was knocking on a memory. I opened the door without a word. He gave me a look that held years. Weddings, funerals, poker nights in the basement. He was thinner now, and his hair had gone completely silver, but his eyes were still as steady as they were when he swore under oath that he'd witnessed every signature on our mortgage. "You made tea?" he asked, stepping inside. "I always make tea." We sat at the small wooden table, the kind meant for quick breakfasts and crossword puzzles. He didn't pull out any papers, just let his fingers wrap around the mug like it was something sacred. "So," he said after a minute, "you're ready." I was ready the day they told me I didn't belong. He nodded. "You want to sell?" "I want to remind them who signed first." He looked at me, really looked, and I saw the recognition settle. "You don't want to fight, do you?" "No," I said. "I just want to be remembered correctly." He sipped his tea. "We can file a property action. Quiet title claim if needed. I'll prepare a notarized statement of your co-ownership. It won't be quick, but it'll be clean." "I'm not in a hurry," I said. "But I won't wait forever." That afternoon, we sorted through the documents together. He had brought copies in a leather briefcase older than most of my grandchildren. My name, my signature, the refinance date in bold. Everything was intact. "They've made assumptions," he muttered, flipping through a form, thinking grief means surrender. They were half right. He didn't ask about the phone calls or the box they sent, didn't ask if I felt sad or angry. He knew better than to waste time naming emotions that were already settled. Instead, he just said, "I'll file the paperwork Monday. You'll get a letter confirming your standing. If they try anything, they'll be the ones trespassing." Good. We said nothing for a long time after that, just sat in the low light of the rental cabin, listening to the wind whistle through the pines. Walter left with a quiet promise and his briefcase tucked under one arm like an old secret. That night, I didn't turn on my phone. I didn't need to. I knew they were calling. Not because they missed me, but because the world they thought they inherited was tilting, and I had barely touched it yet. The next morning, I opened my notebook, the one with my husband's handwriting on the inside cover. It read, "For the things we forget to say." I added a line beneath it. They tried to erase me, so I picked up the pen. I started listing everything I had done in that house. Painted the nursery. Fixed the front steps when Paul slipped on the ice. Cooked 3 meals a day for 20 years straight. Paid the electric bill when his hours got cut. Held his hand when he couldn't hold mine back. I wrote until my fingers cramped. Because memory, once put to paper, becomes truth. And I was done letting others write my story for me. The formal letter from Walter arrived 3 days later. Cream envelope, heavy paper. My name at the top in clean, bold type. Eleanor M. Talbot, co-owner and co-signer, mortgage number 4038 AK. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't threaten. It didn't beg. It simply stated the truth. Effective immediately, all mortgage-related decisions would require mutual consent. Any attempt to alter, transfer, or assume ownership without both signatures would be invalid. A copy had been sent to the county recorder's office, another to the mortgage servicer. There was no room left for misunderstanding. I placed the letter on the small table by the window and stared at it for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because it felt like the first time in weeks that something in my life stood still, firm and unshakable. That afternoon, I drove back to the neighborhood. Not to the house, no. I had no desire to walk those rooms again, not after what they said, not after the way they watched me pack my knitting needles like I was taking up too much space even then. But I drove slowly down the street, windows rolled halfway down. The snow had started to soften, and the evergreens along the roadside had that wet, heavy look that comes before thaw. My old neighbor, Clara, was on her porch in a housecoat, feeding the crows like she always did. She saw me. We locked eyes. Her mouth opened slightly in surprise, but she didn't wave. Maybe she'd heard something, maybe not. But gossip in Alaska travels faster than snowmelt. I pulled into the parking lot of the small grocery store Paul and I used to go to every Sunday. I didn't need much, just flour, butter, and tea. Something about restocking the basics felt right, like reclaiming the rhythm of who I was before they turned me into a relic in my own kitchen. At the checkout, the cashier glanced at the name on my card and looked up. "Are you related to the Talbots? The ones on Willow Bend?" I paused, smiled gently. "I used to be." He didn't ask more. On the way back to the cabin, my phone buzzed. I had left it on by accident. The screen lit up with a message from my son's wife. "We heard from the mortgage company." "What are you trying to do?" Not, "Hi," not, "Are you all right?" Just accusation. Then another. "You're making things very difficult for everyone." There are children in this house. We need stability, not drama. I didn't reply. I just turned off the phone again and set it back in the drawer beside the extra napkins and the tiny salt packets the cabin kept stocked. They wanted stability. They thought I was the storm, but I had been the roof for years. They just never noticed until it started leaking. That night, I baked shortbread. Not for them, for me. Paul used to say I only baked when something in me needed sorting. He wasn't wrong. There was something about the precise motion of kneading, measuring, waiting. Something grounding about the smell of butter and vanilla warming a room. I ate 2 pieces while they were still hot. Then I wrapped the rest in parchment, tied with twine, and set them by the door. The next morning, I left the cabin early, not to visit anyone, not to announce anything, just to walk. The path behind the old school led into the woods, still snow-packed but thinning at the edges. I walked carefully, each step firm, letting the cold bite into my lungs the way truth bites into silence. At the clearing, I stopped and looked up. Above me, the sky stretched vast and bone-pale. A hawk circled. The trees creaked in the wind, like they were reminding each other of who had bent last winter and who had stayed upright. I whispered, more to myself than anything, I'm not bending anymore. Back at the cabin, I made a pot of strong black tea and pulled out Walter's letter again. The next move was mine, and I wasn't going to waste it. Not on bitterness, not on begging, but on something better, something mine. The idea came slowly, like morning light creeping through thick curtains. Not as a flash, not as revenge, but as something simpler, a return. That house had never been about walls or kitchen counters or mortgage terms. It had been about work, decades of it, raising children, patching drywall, stretching paychecks until they snapped. And I had done all of it, quietly, faithfully. I hadn't demanded anything but presence, not affection, not apologies, just a place at the table I had built. But now I wanted more than a seat. I wanted the deed in my hand, not to frame, not to flaunt, just to hold, so I could finally let it go. So I called Walter again. I want to transfer my share, I told him. He paused. To your son? No, to someone who'll actually care for it. You're sure? I'm old, I said, not uncertain. He chuckled quietly. All right, Eleanor. I'll draw up a draft sale agreement. You'll need a realtor. I already have someone in mind. That afternoon, I called Grace. She was a woman I knew from the library, younger than me by 30 years, but older than her co-workers by spirit. Wore her hair in a loose braid, glasses always slipping down her nose. When Paul was dying, she used to set aside his favourite books without being asked. So, he doesn't lose his spot, she said once. When she answered the phone, she sounded surprised. Mrs. Talbot? Just Eleanor now. Are you still working with that realty office? I am. You looking to buy? No, I said. I'm ready to sell. There was a silence. Then, your house. Ours, I said. But I'm the only one who remembers how we bought it. She didn't ask for details. Didn't need to. By the next morning, she had driven out to the rental cabin, wore snow boots and a jacket with a missing button, carried a folder of papers and an old thermos she handed me without comment. Still drink cinnamon tea? She asked. Always. We sat at the table while she walked me through the listing documents. If we list it under your name alone, your co-owner may try to dispute. Unless... I handed her Walter's letter. She read it twice. Full co-ownership, she murmured. That's solid. I don't want an open house, I said. No signs, just private viewings, quiet buyers. Understood. And no selling to anyone who calls it a fixer-upper or a project. I want someone who sees it, Not what they can flip it into. Grace smiled. I'll screen them like they're marrying my daughter. The listing went live 2 days later. Just 3 photos. Sunlight in the kitchen, the front porch with the swing pool built, and the dining room that still held the same table where we'd lit birthday candles for 40 years. No family photos, no names. Just this. Charming 3BR home in the heart of Willow Bend. Owned by one family since 1985. Hand-built porch, mature pines, quiet bones. By nightfall there were 3 inquiries. Grace called. One of them, she said, is a widowed woman in her 50s, schoolteacher. Wants a garden and a quiet porch. Reminds me a bit of you. I didn't hesitate. Show her the house. And your son. What about him? He'll find out. Then let him. That night, I sat with the photo album again. Paul in flannel, me in an apron too big, our son, toothless and giggling, frosting on his nose. We had made a life there, a good one. And I wasn't going to let the last chapter be written by someone who forgot how it began. I went to sleep with the windows cracked open, just enough to hear the wind moving through the trees. In the morning, I would sign the papers. And this time, I wouldn't flinch. It was just past 10 a.m. when Grace arrived with the final documents. She looked wind-chapped and focused, her breath visible in the air between us as she stepped through the door of the cabin. You sure you want to do this today? She asked, setting the folder on the table. I've been sure for weeks, I said, reaching for the pen. She watched me carefully, like people do when they expect hesitation. But my hand didn't tremble, my eyes didn't flinch. I signed where she pointed, 3 times on 3 pages. My name looked smaller than I remembered, but sharper somehow, like it had found its shape again after years of being used in grocery lists and birthday cards and nowhere that really mattered. Grace packed up the folder and slid it into her bag. The buyer's offer was clean, she said. All cash. She cried when she saw the porch swing. Good, I said. She asked if the garden had history. It has memory, I said. That's better. As she left, Grace turned at the door. I know this isn't easy. It's not hard either, I said. Not when you're walking toward yourself. By noon, the wire transfer was complete. The house, the one they told me wasn't mine, was no longer theirs either. It belonged to a woman who had taught 3rd grade for 25 years, who brought a photo of her late husband to the showing and whispered, he would have loved the windows. That afternoon, I walked to the post office. I mailed 2 letters. The first to the mortgage company, confirming the sale and authorizing the final release of my co-ownership. A clean ending, nothing left to dispute. The second, to my son. It wasn't long. The house has been sold. The mortgage is settled. You have 7 days to vacate. Contact the new owner directly for arrangements. This is not a punishment. This is a correction. I didn't sign it, Mom. I signed it E.M. Talbot. That evening, the phone rang for the first time in days. I didn't answer. Then it rang again. And again. By the time I poured my tea, there were 15 missed calls. No voicemails, just numbers. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the tick of the old wall clock. The hands moved with a certainty I envied. Always forward, never flinching. I turned the phone off and slid it under the pillow. Some silences are softer than apologies, others are louder than screams. This one was both. By morning, the messages came. From my son. You can't do this. We live here. We have nowhere to go. Then finally, please call me. But he still never said I'm sorry. He never said you were right. He never said this was your home too. And that was the difference. That was the line. They had mistaken my stillness for surrender. They had mistaken my kindness for consent. But I wasn't silent because I didn't know what to say. I was silent because I knew it was the only way they might ever listen. By that afternoon, Grace called again. "You'll get the deposit confirmation tomorrow," she said. "Do you want me to forward anything else?" "No," I said. "Everything I needed is already here." And it was. A cabin warmed by cinnamon tea, a letter that told the truth, a memory of Paul's hand on mine the day we first signed the papers and whispered, "This will be ours." And now it had been, and now it was gone, and now I was free. The envelope was delivered by courier at precisely 8:17 a.m., 2 days after the sale closed. Certified. Signature required. Left in the hands of my son, on a porch that used to belong to me. Inside, the formal transfer documents, the notification of sale, the statement from the county recorder's office, and a printed notice. "You are no longer authorized occupants of this property. Vacate within 7 days. Failure to comply may result in legal removal by the new owner." Simple. Legal. Cold, perhaps, but no colder than, "This isn't your home anymore." I imagined the moment they opened it, the confusion, the disbelief, maybe even a flicker of panic. I wondered if they read it twice, hoping the words would rearrange into something less final. But paper doesn't flinch, and neither did I. By noon, my phone had buzzed so many times I turned it face down just to reclaim silence. Then the messages shifted. From "What did you do?" to "You're overreacting," to "You've ruined everything." And finally, a voicemail. "Mum, please. We didn't mean it. You're our family. This isn't what Dad would have wanted. Please just talk to us." I listened to it once. He said please twice. But still not once did he say I was wrong. That evening, I sat on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in Paul's old wool coat, watching the sun stretch long orange streaks across the snow. The sky was wide, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing inside something bigger than pain. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was her, my son's wife. The message read, "You'll regret this." 4 words, not even punctuated. I laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just the quiet sound of someone who'd seen the truth, survived it, and learned to drink tea while it boiled. Because regret is a funny thing. It doesn't grow in old bones. It grows in young pride, in empty rooms, in houses filled with echoes instead of voices. And that house, my house, was no longer echoing with their assumptions. It was being cleaned, repainted, prepped for someone who'd run her fingers along the windowsill and say, "This feels like care." That night, I wrote one last letter. Not to them, to myself. "Eleanor, you stayed too long. Not in the house, but in their shadow. You were quiet when you should have remembered. You were patient when you should have protected. But today, you chose yourself. Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. That matters." I folded the paper and placed it inside the notebook with Paul's handwriting on the first page. The one that said, "For the things we forget to say." Now I had said them, and not a single one was wasted. The next morning, I stood at the window, watching snowflakes gather on the sill, each one brief and beautiful, and I whispered something soft into the glass. They'll move. The house will change. But my memory lives in the floorboards, and this time, it's mine to carry. Because home isn't where you're allowed to sleep. It's where no one forgets how you built it. 3 days after the final notice, I got a letter. Not a call, not a message. A real letter, postmarked and folded with care. It was from my granddaughter, the youngest one, the quiet one, the one who always offered to carry the dishes after dinner, even when no one noticed her do it. I opened it slowly, not expecting much. but her handwriting, rounded and a little rushed, made my throat tighten. Dear Grandma, I don't know exactly what happened, but Mom and Dad have been really upset. I heard them saying things they probably didn't want me to hear. I don't understand all of it, but I wanted to say, I remember. I remember how you always made the house feel safe. I remember the smell of your cinnamon bread and how you let me sleep in your room when the thunder was too loud. I remember Grandpa humming while you cooked and how you never raised your voice, even when everyone else did. I don't know who's right. I just know that when you left, something felt wrong. I hope you're okay. I miss you. Love. Anna. I read it 3 times, not because I needed to understand it better, but because I needed to let it settle somewhere real inside me. She remembered. Not the mortgage or the arguments or the documents. She remembered the warmth, the effort, the parts of me that had been invisible to the others. It didn't fix anything, but it healed something. I wrote back that night. Dear Anna, thank you for your letter. I'm okay. Really. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to be soft. They confuse noise with truth and think silence means agreement. I was quiet for a long time, but not because I didn't have anything to say. I just wanted to be heard when I finally did. I miss you too. Maybe one day we'll share cinnamon bread again. Just us. No noise, no forgetting. Love always, Grandma. I mailed it the next morning, wrapped in extra paper because the wind had picked up and the sky promised snow. The kind that doesn't stick, just dances around before vanishing. Like things we wish we'd said sooner. Later that day, Grace called. She moved in, she said. The buyer. I closed my eyes. How does it look? She brought in her own curtains, pale green, planted rosemary in the front pot. Says she's going to paint the porch swing but keep it in the same place. I smiled. She knows what it is, I said. Grace paused. She asked me something. What? She asked if the previous owner would be willing to stop by, just once, to show her where the garden hose leaks and where the wind sneaks in during winter. I looked out the window. The trees were still. The snow hadn't started. Tell her I'll think about it, I said. Because maybe one day I would, not to reclaim anything, but to bless it. To walk through those rooms one last time and say, this was once mine. I filled it with love, and now I'm letting it go. A week passed before I went near the house again. Not to the porch, not to knock, just to see. I parked across the street, behind the row of birches that had stood guard since the year we planted them. They were thinner then, like we all were. Now they cast long shadows, even in winter. The curtains were different, just as Grace had said. Soft green, fluttering slightly in the breeze through an open window. The porch swing had been sanded, repainted in a pale yellow that wasn't mine, but felt kind. A folded quilt rested on one end. There were boots on the mat, children's boots. 2 pairs. Small. A bright red and a dull blue. Their tips dusted with snow. I sat in the car with the engine off, fingers curled around the wheel, watching. Not spying. Just witnessing. The woman came out moments later. The buyer. She wasn't hurried or nervous, just calm. Steady. She knelt to adjust something on one of the flower beds, already clearing old frost to make room for spring. She stood again, turned toward the house, and then stopped. She had seen me. I didn't look away. She didn't wave. But she nodded. Once. Slow. With something behind it. Recognition, maybe? Or gratitude? I nodded back. Then I drove away. That night, I dreamed of the house. Not as it was in the end, filled with closed doors and sharper voices, but as it once had been. Paul, standing in the kitchen in his socks, humming over a half-burnt piece of toast. The children laughing in the hallway. A fire crackling in the hearth. The smell of pine sap and coffee lingering in the corners. The wallpaper was still peeling in the dining room. The window still whistled when the wind was right. Nothing perfect. Just ours. I woke up before dawn and didn't feel sad. Just still. At breakfast, I pulled the notebook from the shelf. The one I had nearly filled these past weeks with names, memories, letters, and lines I didn't think I had the courage to write. I turned to the last page. This was not revenge. This was return. To self. To voice. To dignity. The house is gone. But I'm here. I closed the notebook gently. Some people carve their names into stone to be remembered. Others leave behind rooms filled with memory and the quiet echo of someone who once loved without asking for thanks. I had been that woman. Now I was something else, not broken, not bitter, just whole, and finally unafraid. The cabin was quiet now, not just in sound, but in spirit. I had made it mine in small, careful ways. My shawl over the chair back, Paul's fishing hat on the hook by the door, a small plant on the sill that had finally started to bloom despite the cold. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not a call, not a letter, not an apology that would never come. But still, when the envelope arrived, no return address, just my name in handwriting I knew too well, I sat with it untouched for almost an hour. My son. I opened it slowly. No rustling, no tearing. Just the sound of paper returning home. "Mom, we've moved out. It's strange. The kids don't understand. Anna won't stop asking questions. She read your letter 3 times and carries it around like something sacred. I told her not everything needs answers right away. I want to say I'm sorry. I know that sounds thin now, after everything. I know it's late. I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness, not comfort, not permission. But I remembered something last night. You used to sing to me when I had nightmares, even when I was too old to admit I still had them. You'd sit at the edge of my bed and hum that old hymn until I fell asleep again. I thought you were the bravest person in the world. I forgot that. I thought strength was loud, demanding. I see now that sometimes it's quiet, refusing to move when everyone expects you to. I was wrong. About you. About the house. About what it meant. We don't have much figured out yet. But if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Not waiting. Just hoping. Your son, Michael. I read it once. Then again. Not because I doubted him, but because something in me, some old, bruised part, needed to believe he finally saw me as more than a placeholder for comfort, more than a name on a document. And he did. I didn't cry. I folded the letter and slid it into the notebook beside Anna's. Then I stood, opened the door, let the morning in. It was cold, but not bitter. The kind of cold that wakes the skin, not punishes it. The kind that means something is shifting, ice to water, waiting to movement. Across the yard, the snow had begun to melt in uneven patches, and where the ground peeked through, stubborn and dark, tiny shoots of green had begun to push up. I didn't know yet if I would answer him, but for the first time, the thought didn't hurt. It felt possible. I spent the next few days moving through my mornings without the usual weight. Not lighter, exactly. Just less braced. Like I'd finally stopped expecting the floor to fall through. The cabin became more than a shelter. It became a rhythm. The tea in the morning, the walk to the post office, the way the wind shook the trees outside my window at dusk. I began to find comfort in the repetition, in the way small things refused to fall apart, even when everything else had tried to. Grace stopped by with a fresh loaf of bread and a note from the woman who'd bought the house. She says thank you, Grace told me, setting the note on the table. She said the house feels like it remembers you. I didn't open the note right away. Just let my fingers rest on it like I was listening through paper. She's planted tulips, Grace added, where the rose bush used to be. I smiled. Good. The next morning, I opened the note. Ms. Talbot, I hope this isn't too forward, but I wanted to tell you something. Your house, our house now, I suppose, has a warmth I didn't expect. Not from the furnace or the sun through the windows. It's something else. Like the walls know what it means to carry people. We found an old marble under the fridge, and a handwritten recipe behind the spice rack. My daughter thinks it's a treasure map. I think it's a reminder. If you ever want to visit, not as a former owner, but as someone who still belongs to the story, I'd be honoured. With gratitude, Margaret, I set the letter beside Anna's and Michael's. 3 voices, 3 different notes, all stitched now into the quiet fabric of my days. That afternoon, I walked the long path behind the cabin, where the pine trees stretch in lines and the snow gives way first. I sat on the bench Paul had helped me drag here 2 winters ago, before he started forgetting what season it was. He used to say this was the best spot to hear silence, not emptiness. Silence. The kind that holds you steady. I closed my eyes and listened. No phones, no arguments, no expectations. Just the wind and the small crackle of branches adjusting in the cold. It was enough. Maybe that was the lesson after all. Not to win, not to reclaim, but to release. To plant tulips in place of thorns. To answer not with fire, but with presence. To become something stronger than ownership. Memory that stands without permission. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The snow melted fast that year. By mid-April, the pines around the cabin were dripping, and the creek behind the post office began to murmur again, like it had waited all winter for someone to listen. I started waking before the alarm. Not out of habit, but because my sleep no longer felt like hiding. I made breakfast slowly. 2 eggs, toast, tea. I sat by the window and watched the day arrive like it had something to offer. The letter from Michael stayed in the notebook, untouched. But I found myself thinking of him more gently. Less like a wound, more like an old scar that no longer stung when brushed. He hadn't written again. And that was all right. Sometimes one letter is enough to shift the whole story. What came next wasn't grand. No dramatic returns, no reconciliations at family tables. Just life, steady and soft. Grace brought over seed packets one afternoon. "You ever try lavender?" she asked. "I haven't," I said, "but I'm not finished trying." She smiled and handed me a trowel. We planted it together, near the porch, in the one patch of soil already warming. The ground was stubborn but willing, like me, I suppose. That night, I wrote another letter. Not to send, just to write. Paul, the house is gone, but I did it right. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I remembered who I was and acted like it mattered. Michael wrote to me. "I think you'd be proud of the way I answered. Not with coldness, but with distance. The kind that's earned, not built from spite. Anna remembers. She really remembers. I think you'd like the woman in the house now. Margaret. She's quiet, present. She sees the good before she looks for the flaws. Reminds me of you. I still keep your hat on the hook. Not for grief, for company." I folded the letter and tucked it into the same notebook. It was nearly full now. And I liked that. A full notebook meant a full voice. Later, as the sun dipped low, I stepped outside with a blanket and sat on the porch. The cabin was still, the trees tall. The air held that thin smell of thaw and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called out once, then fell silent, and I whispered something into the wind. Not a prayer, not a demand, just the truth. I came back to myself, and I wasn't leaving again. It was a Sunday when I returned to the house, not out of need, not from longing, just readiness. Margaret had written again, this time not on paper, but in a voice message sent through Grace. Tell her the tulips are blooming. I think she should see them. I didn't ask if anyone was home. I didn't want a visit, or a cup of tea, or an apology wrapped in politeness. I wanted to stand on the porch I had painted twice with Paul, to run my hand along the railing we once repaired with 2 short nails and stubborn pride. I wanted to see the place not as something taken, but something passed on, given freely, let go of without losing myself. The sky was clear, that rare, deep blue that only comes after a long winter. I parked at the end of the block and walked the last stretch alone, listening to the gravel under my shoes, the breeze through the pines, and the hush of a neighborhood going about its quiet Sunday. The house was the same, and not. The porch swing had a cushion now. The paint on the shutters was newer. Someone had placed a welcome mat that read, "Stay as long as you like." I smiled, and the tulips, bright red, soft yellow, one deep violet. They rose in clumsy beauty around the base of the porch, messy, uneven, full of life. I knelt without thinking, brushing dirt gently from one bloom. "You planted deep," came a voice behind me. I turned slowly. Margaret stood at the top step. No apron, no smile forced. Just a woman holding a basket of laundry and offering space. "They're strong," I said. "They were waiting," she replied. We stood in silence. 2 women, both shaped by grief and survival, both unwilling to ask more of each other than truth. "I won't stay," I said. "You can?" she answered. "I won't," I repeated, with a gentleness that surprised even me. "But thank you." She nodded. "Would you like to see the kitchen?" I hesitated, then nodded. Inside, everything felt smaller, not in a diminished way, just scaled to new hands. The kitchen table was different, lighter wood. The old creak in the floorboard by the sink remained. I stepped on it and felt the familiar give. Margaret watched me carefully, respectful of the pause. "I used to hum in here," I said, "to drown out the silence. I do that too." I walked room to room, not as an intruder, as a witness. The den had new books on the shelves, a child's drawing on the wall, what looked like a tree, a sun, 2 smiling faces. In the corner, an old marble sat in a jar. "The one we found," she said softly. "I couldn't throw it out." I smiled. When we returned to the door, I turned once more, not to take in the walls or the ceiling, but the light. "It remembers you," she said. "No," I corrected her. "I remember it. That's enough." Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the birches. I thanked her. She didn't ask for a number or a promise to return. She simply handed me a small cloth bundle. "Bread," she said. "I used your recipe." I held it with both hands. Back at the cabin, I placed the bread on the table and sat in silence. I didn't need to call anyone, didn't need to share it online, didn't need validation or applause, because I had arrived at something larger than revenge, deeper than even peace. It was restoration, not of property, of presence. I wasn't just someone's mother, or someone's wife, or someone who once lived in a house that was almost taken from her. I was a woman who had been erased and rewrote herself. A woman who had chosen dignity over noise, grace over permission, and finally, truth over comfort. If anyone asked me now what happened, I would say this. They thought I was done. I wasn't. They thought I had no claim. I did. They thought they'd broken me. But I had only just begun. And in the quiet of that spring morning, I spread a slice of bread with honey, sat by the open window, and let the world carry on without needing anything from me. I was home, in myself, at last.